In chapter 15, we talked about some of the things that could happen in a contract, like mistakes and disagreements. Because there are things that are going to happen, like there are mistakes when you're reading a contract and what could possibly happen. So I'm going to talk about what happens when there is to a contract when a mistake is found, when it's not actually a mistake but rather intentional. Then I'm going to talk about the mistake of fact, mistake of value, unilateral and bilateral mistakes, innocent and fraudulent misinterpretation, and adhesion contracts and the court's view of these agreements. So mistakes are going to happen in contract. There are some contracts there will just be a mistake. It's just either by one party or both parties. They didn't realize the mistake, but usually mistakes are still enforceable if it's about the value of what is at hand. But when it's a mistake of fact of something important about it, like I didn't know about this product or anything like that, or they didn't bring it up or they didn't know quite about that, there's just some mistake like that, then there could be a voided contract, but those are just in some cases. When it's intentional, however, usually that party that did the intentional mistake or did the mistake intentionally or did the mistake intentionally, usually they are gonna have to be at fault for it. So it just kind of really depends in these certain situations about what happens there. Like when it's an actual mistake, like you didn't know about it, like there may be some leeway, but when it's intentional, like you purposely left something out or something like that, then usually those contracts can be voided. So like mistake of fact, that's when it's talking about kind of what's like mistake, reasonable mistake of fact is about the material itself, the material itself, about like what's in this contract about, where the mistake of value, like you didn't realize, oh, I didn't know it was gonna be this price here in the future. But that's something you have to take into account is the prices in the future. So when it's mistake of value, usually those cannot be voided because that's kind of on that party for knowing or not knowing what it's going to be. Now a unilateral mistake, that's when there's a mistake by one party. Usually these are still enforceable contracts unless there was a mistake of fact made, or if there was a error due to something mathematical about it, like not all the numbers are quite adding up, or like you didn't factor in how much you had to pay for this, like they didn't factor in how much you had to pay for this and they didn't tell you about that hidden cost, stuff like that. Then it can be avoided and talked about making a new one possibly. When it's a bilateral mistake, that's when it's a mistake by both parties. Usually these ones are avoidable because both of them made a mistake, but usually it has to be on the grounds of a mistake of fact rather than a mistake of value. So usually these ones can be rescinded by either party, where in the unilateral, it can only be rescinded by only one of the parties. But yeah, in the bilateral one, it can be rescinded by either because they both made a mistake about something in the contract. And then innocent and fraudulent misinterpretations. Usually fraudulent misinterpretations consist of intent to deceive. So I'm telling you, like, if you're gonna buy this car, like, oh, this car is absolutely amazing, there's nothing wrong with it, doesn't need new parts or anything, even though if I knew there was something wrong with the engine or one of the parts in there that I didn't tell them about that they're gonna have to replace, there's intent to deceive there. And so that's one where the other party, when they find out about it, they can make the original party pay for it or something like that. And usually in those type of cases where there's intent to deceive, the court is going to rule in favor of the party that got deceived, unless there's like some extra part of the contract adhering to how they can recuperate some of the damages or something like that. And then adhesion contracts and the court's view of these agreements. Adhesion contracts are written exclusively by one party, and it is set forth to the other one. So like you can, if you want to take this, great. If not, you don't. Like there's no negotiating on this. It's either take it or leave it type of contract. And these contracts usually kind of will go towards like help out that first party, because it's either going to help them or the other party's not going to take it, and then nothing hurt. So usually there's no negotiation across these, and so it's usually benefiting only one, because like usually the other party doesn't really quite have a say in that contract. They have to take it, or like if they want to deal with them, they have to take it, or they just have to completely cut out that their business with that group, something like that. Generally, federal courts will rule in favor of the contracts if there's an arbitration clauses, and those clauses usually provide a meaningful way for consumers to recuperate some of the damages or anything like that for alleged harms that they could get from this, or recuperate some damages, anything like that. But usually, for the most part, there has to be an arbitration clause that's set forth in the contract in order for the government to rule in favor of the contract. Otherwise, they're not going to rule in favor, and they're going to help out that party that kind of got screwed over with on that deal.